We ready? Okay, we are ready. It is 5:01. I call this FedRAC meeting to
Recording in
order.
progress.
Okay, thank you. We'll just do a quick introduction. For the record, my name is Huang Tran, chair of this committee. On my left is Council President Linda Kochma, Council Member Jack Walsh. On my right, Deputy Mayor Honda, and newly appointed Council Member Paul McDaniel. Welcome. Do we have any council member online? I don't have the.
Susan will be voting for Dobie. Susan will vote for Dobie.
Okay, Deputy Mayor will cast her vote on behalf of committee member Jack Dovey.
Just point of order. The council president can fill in for missing council members to form a quorum and to vote, but the deputy mayor cannot.
Okay,
Oh, all right. I'll do it then.
so in that case, you will be the
I'll
one
be
that.
the voting member. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Okay, the first item is public comments. Do we have any public comments?
No public comment.
No public comments. Thank you. We are moving on to committee business. The first item is item A, approval of summary minutes for May 2023.
Move approval of the minutes.
We have a motion to approve the minutes. Do I have a second? I can do a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So the matter passed 2-0. Moving on to item B, converting position within the police department. Deputy Chief, welcome.
Good evening, Council. Kyle Sumter, Deputy Chief of Police, representing the Police Department. It is my pleasure to speak for the department tonight on a question of converting two positions to places where we need the resources more. One is converting one of our two deputy chief positions to a police commander, and another is converting two part-time records specialist positions to another quartermaster position. Now, first for financial impacts, and before I get to that, because I don't want to bury the lead talking about a minimal amount of dollars, the purpose we are making these conversions for is to take existing personnel resources and put them where our needs are emerging greater. We have needs everywhere, where we have needs greater. Now for financial impacts, the difference between a top step commander and a deputy chief is approximately $32,928 a year. And the difference between two part-time records specialists and a full-time quartermaster position will cost the city approximately $16,236 a year. For a difference of positive to the city, we'll save the city approximately $16,692 a year. But that's coincidental to the reason. We're not doing it for $16,000. Again, the purpose is to get more bang for the dollar spent. As you are probably aware, along with a variety of administrative assignments that police commanders have, they also go to the most serious public safety events occurring in the city, and they assume command as incident commander at those events. Commanders also assume roles on regional teams and task forces, all of which act as significant force multipliers in federal way. And as part of the police department management team, police commanders are exempt employees, just as deputy chiefs are. A little bit of history then. In 2001, the Federal Way, more than 20 years ago, the Federal Way Police Department had 6 police commanders, 2 deputy chiefs, and a chief at the time. And at that time, the police department had approximately 120 total police officers. During the recession of 28 to 12, the commander oversight was reduced to 5. And now in 2023, we have several newly selected police supervisors who need mentoring at the commander level, and commanders deal directly with police supervision. Especially now, with an authorized police force of 154 commissioned and limited commissioned uniformed personnel, the need for additional command oversight cannot be overstated. In addition to converting a deputy chief position to commander, we have a greater need to support our greatly expanded vehicle fleet. At the Federal Way Police Department, as we have expanded in recent years, for which we are very grateful, by the way, going from 120 to now up to 150 plus 4 limited commissioned officers, we now have a vehicle fleet exceeding 200 vehicles. And given the nature of public safety, the amount of wear and tear and damage that occurs to these vehicles, there is a lot to do with both acquiring vehicles, and as you are aware, nationwide and worldwide, the competition to acquire vehicles and parts to repair them is significant. It's a full-time job managing this fleet. And it's not just the fleet. We also have 154 uniformed officers, 186 total employees, all of which need outfitting, supplies, and so forth. We have one person currently doing all of that. She is a do-all, as much as she can do, person. And the need that has emerged there has exceeded our need for transcription. As you might guess, there are other technologies now that are replacing transcription. We recently had 2 record specialists who were part-time, adding up to a full-time employee, both of whom have recently retired, and those positions are now vacant. So nobody's losing a job. We are asking the council to convert those 2 part-time positions to a second full-time quartermaster position, so that newly selected person can deal with uniforms and equipment and gear, and the existing quartermaster can deal with fleet. Have you any questions for us?
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm wondering, will we get a chance to meet the new commander?
Absolutely. In fact,
Okay.
you're going to meet a couple of newly promoted commanders, I think, at the very
At
next
the next
council meeting.
Oh,
It's
that's
either
wonderful.
on July 5th?
Yeah.
Oh, one of them.
this one.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate
And some new lieutenants,
Yeah, okay. Be sure to let us know if there's anything else you need.
certainly.
Okay. Are we okay?
I have a
Item
question.
C, go ahead.
Thanks for being here. So the 200 vehicles, does that include the vehicles, the new ones we bought with ARPA, or? are we
Yes,
still-
it does.
So we have all the vehicles that we were.
No, they haven't all arrived yet. We still have some on order. As I mentioned, it's hard. We're competing with a lot of people, not just police departments, but a lot of people for similar parts. And we have at least 4 more still to come in, but they've been ordered for quite some time.
Does this include motorcycles? The 200 vehicles?
I do not know if 204 is the number. I don't know if that includes motorcycles, but it definitely includes the large vehicles that you see, the bomb vehicle, the SWAT vehicle, the animal services vehicles. It includes those specialty vehicles. I will have to check the numbers to see if it includes the motorcycles. What's that? We do. Yes,
All right, thank you.
you bet.
Okay, I don't see any lights on, so can I have a motion, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair Tran. I move to forward the proposed police department positions conversions to the July 5th, 2023 consent agenda for approval.
I'll second that. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, the matter passed 2-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering if we need to just simply state that Councilmember Dobie was excused. You might have said that already, but
Yes, thank you for that reminder.
thank you.
Due to his business schedule, council members or committee members, Jack Dovey is excused from this meeting. Thank you. Item C, tax increment financing information briefing. Steve, welcome.
Good evening, Finance Committee, and welcome to Councilmember McDaniel. You have chosen a delightful meeting to start, And there are two schools of thought. I don't know whether you know that Keith Nivens and Cheney Skedson have been running circles around finance, getting the tax increment financing information, their project out. It's about time that finance steps up to the podium, or I finally get to share with you the fun part. You can choose. The purpose of this is a briefing. It's on the public meeting schedule that we need to go through as we process through the tax increment. And I want to start with telling our financial story in a way that I'm going to be when we go down to Olympia to present to the treasurer, or if we do credit rating agency presentations, people that may not be as familiar with the city as we are. I don't need to tell you on the dais about the public amenities that are city-owned, city-operated. When I show a map of the city, people that may just travel up and down the I-5 corridor may not know all the things that we do. And so it's, as part of the financial presentation, part of the context of our tax increment financing, we want to point out that the city actually owns and operates the Performing Arts Center, the Dumas Bay Center, the Federal Way Community Center. There are a lot of parks and lakes and public trails and wetlands, and I even added, well, Kyle's gone. I even added police substations because they're on the map. But wait, there's more, because of the city management, we have attracted other investments in the city. Wild Waves Park, which of course is visible from the freeway, but there's also the Rhododendron Botanical Garden, the Bonsai Museum. The state has got a Dash Point Park, and the county, of course, has the Aquatic Center. So that's a lot of features going on, and I want to lay that out as context. If I'm making a presentation for somebody that doesn't live here, I want to show them what our parks look like. If you look, if somebody hadn't been to our city, they wouldn't know that we have parks that are of this quality, and this is a very attractive way to present the city. Our community center, this is a building that the city built a while back. It's clearly popular with programming. And I also would include our city hall, because these are all pieces that begin to paint a picture for somebody. Before I show them the numbers and the tables and the charts, I want to describe what our city is, because when we start talking about a tax increment project, we're inviting outside investment to add to what is already really, really nice here in the city. If I switch to a map, we know that if you come in off the I-5, there's a major interchange at 320th, and if you come right off there are, now I've got hotels. I've got 3 sites, but that's really 5 of our 6 are in those locations, so I didn't need to clutter up the map unnecessarily. The retail district, this is representative of scores of retail outlets that are in this region. Our Performing Arts Center is right there. The new Sound Transit Station is there. And Town Square Park, which we're very proud of, and I didn't show a picture of previously, is there. I want to focus the financial eye on our Performing Arts Center and the Sound Transit Station, because the property that our Performing Arts Center sits on, it's the cornerstone, it's the beginning element of what we have poised to be a development agreement. And this, this was built in 2017. The city designed a beautiful one. We're extremely proud of it, and it just becomes the first domino in a chain that we're gonna argue is a really good investment. Sound Transit, I tried to come up with something more interesting than maps, but I still have this. The Sound Transit, I don't know that credit analysts would particularly care, but we think that it's significant that Sound Transit is extending its operations down. You can see I've got Seattle, SeaTac Airport, and Federal Way identified. And what do they add? They add a lot of people, a lot of traffic coming right to our town center. It's not just a hope, because here you can see these are pictures that I got from Keith. I think these are terrific pictures. These show that it isn't that we can say that in the future Sound Transit is coming. They're well under construction, and just for those of you that are looking to see where is that Performing Arts Center, there it is, right within walking distance of Sound Transit. The reason I focus on these 2 items is because this is the development that is right between there's the Performing Arts Center that exists currently. The yellow buildings and the blue buildings, those are the ones that Keith and Shani talk so much about. and they're getting our community really familiar with them. And this is a big piece of our tax increment project. So that's the introduction I wanted to use before asking Keith to come up. It was his agenda item in the first place to talk about the advances in the development in the project. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. That was fast. Good evening, City Council, Committee Chair Tran, and City Council members. Keith Niven, Community Development Director. So Steve gave you a lot of context. Last time we talked about tax increment financing with you was at your retreat in January. Councilmember McDaniel, I hope you and I can sit down and chat through a lot of details that I would love to share with you to get you up to speed. So we kind of gave a big presentation at your retreat. We kind of were just testing the waters with you to say, is this a good idea, bad idea? I think you gave us a thumbs up that we should kind of continue to pursue this. So we've been doing quite a bit of work. And tonight, I think we're getting you back up to speed with where we are before we go out to the community with some conversations. Part of this is, as you know, with the redevelopment of TC3, which Steve showed a plan for that we're currently working on a development agreement with Trent Development for, and hope to have a development agreement to you by the end of the year. What that does is put some balls in play in terms of us needing to do some things to make sure we're not causing a problem kind of in our downtown area. And so part of what we're doing with this tax increment financing discussion is there is a project list that needs to be something that's put together by the city, which says, what will you use that tax increment for? And as you know, as we start to redevelop TC3, what we're doing is we're going to be removing some of the parking that is necessary for the PAC. And so part of what becomes on our project list is to build a parking garage and incorporate it into that development project that will be public parking for the PAC and for other people wanting to visit our downtown. That has been something that we have heard from the City Council for the past year and a half plus, and that is kind of number one on our project list. Number two is, as you hopefully can envision from the site plan for TC3, there's envisioned to be a large public plaza immediately east of the PAC as kind of an outdoor gathering space for the community. And so those two projects we really see incorporating into the TC3 project, and those come with a price tag. So as we talk about the taxes that will be gained as properties go up in value for this area, we are basically leveraging that increased value to pay for those public projects that are potentially on this list. Now, the way the list works is there are many more things on this list than we will probably ever be able to afford. But the way that it works is if you don't include them on the list, then you can't use tax increment dollars to help fund them. So you create the list, it's bigger than you think you potentially need, and you get as far down the list as you can, and hopefully you do what's necessary, which for us, I think, is building the parking garage and the Civic Plaza. So with that, there's a bunch of slides that I'm not going to read because it's a bunch of words. And we're going to go to, hopefully Nick is on the line. Is Nick on the line, Samantha?
Yes, he is.
All right, so I'm going to turn it over to our consultants from Tiberius Solutions, who will lead you through the next portion of this presentation. And Nick, if you give me just a heads up on when to flip the slides, I will be more than happy to do that for you.
No problem. Thank you, Keith. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So this next section of the presentation really focuses on the financial forecast. So Keith explained what the city would like to fund with this revenue source. So my job and my role in this project is to forecast how much revenue we anticipate the area would generate. So on the next slide, I was able to come and meet with City Council back in January. And the purpose of that meeting was really to provide a broad overview of tax increment financing as a tool and how it might be used in federal way. But that presentation also included a preliminary forecast of financial capacity. So we wanted to give you an update on that forecast and everything that had changed since then. Major changes have made to the forecast. In particular, since January, the city has selected One Trent as the preferred developer for the cornerstone site in this area. And so we have a specific proposal from them on the amount and timing of value of construction that would occur in that area. In addition to that, any of the speculative development that we were forecasting here, we've shifted out in the project timeline, assuming that really the One Trent project is going to be the very first domino to fall here before we see other private development projects begin to occur. On top of that, we worked with city staff to make sure that we were appropriately factoring in the multifamily tax exemption program that applies here. And so we now assume that the vast majority of construction in this area is going to be multifamily construction. And we assume that over time, all of this area will be eligible for the tax exemption program. And that does take a bite out of the financial capacity for tax increment financing. So obviously, if you're trying to collect the tax revenues generated in this area, but you have another program that is abating and exempting those tax revenues for a period of time, those two kind of counteract each other a little bit. And on top of all of that, there were some refinements to the estimated tax rates that would be applied to this area going forward. So with all of those changes, our revenue forecast has gone down from what we presented in January. I will say that the forecast that we have, whether it goes up or down, doesn't actually dictate your future here. These forecasts are for planning purposes only. They are non-binding. As Keith mentioned, you have a project list that's geared to be higher than your anticipated level of funding, and only time will tell in the future exactly how much new construction does occur here, at what value, and with what tax rates. So you'll have to wait and see how this unfolds over the next 25 years to see how much revenue is actually generated. But we do like these forecasts up front to provide this planning level analysis and help set the community's expectations for what amount of projects are reasonable to assume will be funded here. And so when we were here in January, we were estimating that the total amount of revenue that could be generated in this area over the 25-year period was over 140 million. And now when we're looking at the updated forecast, it's closer to 70 million. Right now, I think we're forecasting 69 million. So it has changed significantly. We actually feel really good about the forecast that we have at this point in time, and we feel that we've been appropriately conservative going forward, and there certainly are opportunities for this area to outperform the forecast. So Keith, on the next slide, we talk about the speculative construction that we are forecasting here. So we sort of skipped over it in the slide deck, but you'll see in the PowerPoint there are specific assumptions on the timing and value of the One Trent project. But on top of that, we worked with a market economist to forecast the likely amount and timing of future development in this area. That assumption, or that analysis, estimated that roughly 17% of the developable properties in this area would develop over this 25-year time frame. Again, that's a fairly conservative estimate. We're not saying that everything in this boundary is going to be completely transformed over the next 25 years, but that this would be a gradual process, and there'd still be lots of additional development opportunity that could outperform this projection. We again pushed things out to say that none of this speculative construction would occur until after phase one of One Trent has begun. And it does assume that 100% of the new construction in this area that's multifamily would qualify for the 8-year multifamily tax exemption. Overall, even with these relatively conservative forecasts, we assume that there'd be $1.6 billion of new improvement values that'd be added to the tax rolls. That's in today's dollars over the course of 25 years. The next slide, Keith, really illustrates what that forecast looks like. So you can see the very dark blue line at the bottom of this chart. That's showing the taxes from the assessed value that's there today, growing slowly but steadily over time. And you can see how the new construction, which is shown in the light blue and the yellow, just greatly exceeds the amount of value that is there today. And so you can see right around 2029 is when we expect the new construction value from the One Trent project to begin to hit the tax rolls. But that is shown in yellow here as being tax exempt. So we assume that much of that construction would be residential, multifamily, and that's going to have that 8-year tax abatement. And so it's going to take a while before we start to really see that boost the tax rolls. You can see around the year 2037 or 2038, when the light blue section of this chart begins to really take off, that's when the earlier construction that occurred now has exited that 8-year period of abatement, and it's now fully taxable. And that's really when that starts to take off. So the two key takeaways that I have from this chart and our forecast here is that the amount of new construction value that this area is estimated to experience just really greatly exceeds the amount of value that's there today. It's going to be a massive transformation in the overall look and feel of the area and a massive increase in the overall tax base. And then the second takeaway is that the massive increase in tax base will be delayed due to the multifamily nature of the development here and the existing abatement program that takes effect. So you'll start to see these new buildings come out of the ground several years before you start to see the impact on your tax rolls. And that's just how these two separate tools happen to work together here. The next slide, Keith. Whenever we talk about the amount of revenue raised from tax increment financing, we always want to be clear about who is impacted by this revenue. And so the bulk of the impacts are experienced by the impacted taxing districts. This is the list of tax districts that are impacted. And on the subsequent slide, we see the list of the taxing districts and levies that are not impacted. So it's a bit of a confusing mixed bag of whether you're a tax that's impacted or not. Key things in terms of what's not impacted include schools, both the state school levies and the local school levies, and then any of the bonds that have been voted on by the taxpayers, they are excluded. But any regular tax levies are included in the rates. And when we look at the next slide, this is showing the forecast amount of tax allocation revenues we're expecting the area to receive. So this shows close to $0 in 2025, which is the first year that the area would be eligible to receive revenue. Again, that stays relatively small through the 2020s and the early 2030s, as most of the construction that occurs is exempt. And then it really takes off by around 2035 into 2036. And you see this ramp up rapidly after that point in time, getting to over $6 million per year in the final year of the forecast period. So substantial growth in tax allocation revenues long-term here. The next slide, I believe, shows how these revenues impact the overlapping taxing districts. So these are all the districts that we anticipate are going to be foregoing revenues over this time frame. The most impacted districts are those that have the highest tax rates. So that's South King Fire and Rescue, that's the city's general fund itself, and that's the countywide regular levy. Those are going to be where the majority of the impacts occur. The total amount of revenue that we're forecasting the area would receive, we've mentioned, is around $69 million. We're showing here the cumulative impacts on the taxing districts, $65 million. The difference between those two figures is that the latest interpretation we have from the Department of Revenue and working with the county assessors across the state is that the tax allocation revenues will have a slight positive impact on the overall levies that are imposed. So that means that there will be a small increase to the tax bills of folks within the city. That explains the difference between the $65 million of impact to taxing districts and the $69 million in total revenue that's anticipated to be generated here. And again, these are numbers over the full 25-year period. So the annual numbers are much, much smaller than that, starting off very small in those early years and then growing over time as the assessed value grows here as well. And then there's one footnote on this slide that I want to make sure that we read. And that is, as part of having a conservative forecast for our revenue projections, we've assumed that all of the lid lifts in this area expire as they are currently scheduled to. Several of those would expire before 2025, when the tax increment area would take effect. And so those ones aren't even showing up on this chart as having an impact. But if there are any new or renewed lid lifts that are approved by voters in the future, they would be impacted. And so that would increase the impacts shown here, but it would also increase the amount of revenue that the tax increment area receives and increase the ability of the city to fund projects with that tax increment area. So 2 more slides, then I think I turn things over back to city staff and their financial advisors. One slide we wanted to call out were impacts specifically to South King Fire and Rescue. And that's because not only are they the most impacted taxing district in the terms of the total dollar amount, but the legislation that approved tax increment finance areas says that you have to include an analysis of the impacts on fire districts. So it's specifically called out for in the report that is generated along with this project. So the total cumulative impact for the fire district here is estimated to be close to 25 million over the 25-year period, which would be an average of about $1 million per year, though again, starting off much smaller than that and growing larger than that over time. That number is in nominal dollars. So we know $1 20 years from now does not have the same purchasing power as $1 today. So when we adjust that for inflation, the total estimated value of that impact in today's dollars is closer to 13 million. So certainly there is a significant impact on all overlapping taxing districts, including the fire district. As of right now, we do not believe that the maintenance and operations or general obligation bond levies of the fire district would be impacted. We are having ongoing conversations with the county assessor to make sure that we're all in agreement on our methodology and that they concur with which tax rates are impacted and which ones are not. The amount of tax impact that we're talking about here is estimated to be less than 5% of that district's total assessed value in all future years. So significant numbers, but not necessarily that significant of a percent when you look at the big picture. The statutes do mention that there are options for mitigation plans for impacted taxing districts, but that mitigation plan isn't required unless the impact to the fire district is over 20% of their total assessed value. Again, we're looking at less than 5% here in all future years. And depending on feedback from FEDRAC tonight, if City Council is in support of this plan moving forward, then the next steps on this project would be doing outreach to all impacted taxing districts and having staff reach out to their counterparts at these districts to make sure they understand how they would be impacted and make sure they understand the city's vision for this area and how in the long-term grand scheme of things, the investments that would be made here and the foregone revenues being made here would reap rewards down the road as this tax base increases and the area closes down, and then all the taxing districts benefit from the grown tax base. And then the last slide I have, Keith, before we turn things back over to the city, just emphasizing our key takeaways. So again, this revenue forecast is non-binding. It's for planning purposes only. We're just hoping to make sure we set expectations appropriately for the amount of projects that might be able to be funded here. This forecast is intentionally conservative, so it's possible that higher value development occurs in this area or occurs faster than we forecast, or that there are additional tax rates that are approved here that increase the amount of tax revenues. And if any of those things occur, it will result in more revenue than we've currently forecast here. A major consideration when we're looking at this area is that it looks like it's primed for a lot of multifamily construction, and that particular construction type happens to qualify for a tax abatement program, which does reduce the amount of financial capacity that the tax increment area will have. And then we focus mostly on the impacts to the other taxing districts, but it does look like this tool will have a small increase on the actual tax bills. Per every $100,000 of assessed value, on average, we're looking at roughly 35 cents of increased tax bill per year. So again, for a single family home, you're looking at less than a couple of dollars per year But it is an impact, and we want to make sure that that is transparent and we are sharing that information with everyone. So with that, I'm going to turn things back over to, I think, the city staff and to introduce their financial advisors. I don't know if we're stopping for questions along the way. Since I'm not in the room, I can't see if there are folks that have questions they need to get answered at this point in time.
Thanks, Nick. We're going to keep rolling and get through the presentation, although all of the speakers will be available when we're through. I'd like to ask Matt Schoenfeld to come up to the podium. Council members, at the retreat that we had back at Dumas Bay, you were able to meet our previous speaker, Nick Popanuk from Tiberius. Finance has added some professional services, brought some expertise. I want to introduce to you PFM Financial Advisors. They're a national company. They've been operating in 31 states. They've been around 50 years. I've worked with them in California on the investment side. I think the trading desk was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. In the world of municipal, financial advisor means something very specific. They have a high degree of obligation to advocate for our interests. We're the client, and the advice that they give us has to be, they're registered and regulated by the SEC, MSRB. I just say that to point out that they are here to advise us in our interests. This company has worked hard for their reputation and references. I know that they, when we considered who to add, PFM has done tax increment work with the Port of Vancouver, City of Kirkland, City of Ridgefield. Outside of TIF financing work, they advise a lot of cities: Auburn, Everett, Issaquah, Kirkland, Redmond, Richland, Snoqualmie, Tukwila. They come well spoken. They're spoken highly of. They also work with counties and ports and utility districts. Our part of the deal here is to give them what we know, so that they can give us the advice. They're a trusted advisor, not only on the tax increment financing, but I also am looking farther on to the public works maintenance facility, because we want to make sure that we are doing what's best for the city in the long term, and we get through both of those projects. So I wanted you to meet. We are working principally with Matt and Duncan. Duncan is not here, so I will hand it over to Matt. Because our initial request, they have just recently come on to us. They have worked with Tiberius, and they've worked with our bond counsel, Foster Garvey. So they're perfectly used to working for a team, but I wanted you to meet them and give us some initial numbers. And as this thing progresses, we'll pull together. Matt?
Great, thank you, Steve, and thank you, council members, for allowing me to present to you today. Only thing I would add to the introduction is we are based out of the Northwest. We have a Northwest practice of 7 registered advisors. Myself and Duncan Brown make up the team that will be representing the city. We very much look forward to working with the city here on out. As Steve mentioned, our role in this process at this point is to really look at the debt side of things in the financing of the tax increment financing legislation. And while the project that is built is obviously the most important thing, and there's a lot on the revenue side that Nick just talked about, the financing, while a part of the name of the legislation, is a small but very important piece of this. It's how you actually pay for the project to a certain extent. I'm in control of this, right? Beautiful. So we were initially, the initial part of this process was the city asking us to model what the financing is actually going to look like in the context of the revenue projections provided by Nick and the Tiberius team. In this initial modeling assumptions, we used a $24.8 million project assumption. This is based specifically off of the parking garage project. This is $30 million. We assumed a $30 million project. In our conversation with city staff, we assumed that there would be we've assumed there would be a $10 million cash contribution from the developer, of which $4.8 million of that would be used to extinguish an interfund loan that was used for I believe the target acquisition of the property originally. This leaves us with that $24.8 million amount. As Nick mentioned on one of his last slides, we really want to emphasize the point that these are very preliminary numbers. I can almost guarantee you that a lot of these assumptions that we will use will change. And so the point that we were really trying to drive home is just to really start the conversation and the considerations about how much the city is going to have to pay out of pocket, impacted the general fund, especially in the early years of this project as construction comes online and the multifamily tax exemption does expire after the 8-year period. The two scenarios that we are presenting to you today, they're more kind of the generic considerations that we will talk about, but really when we go to market, which won't be, for a year and a half to 2 years down the line when the projects are actually constructed, the considerations may be different. We might have a better idea of what the development will look like. So, as I mentioned, we really just want to focus on kind of the preliminary considerations about what the impacts will be. To talk a little bit about the assumptions behind it, we're assuming that the project will be eligible for tax exemption on the bonding side. This means that it'll be used for a public purpose based off the city's current bond rating, as well as a 0.25% cushion to add a little conservatism into the projection. We also assume that the issue date would be December 24. We would note that this is certainly on the early end of when we would expect construction to start. But considering that it would be, the increment era would go into effect at the earliest June 1, 24, we wanted to, kind of get it in line with when we expect the revenues to start as well. So the first scenario is what we would consider to be a vanilla, straight-ahead bond structure. If we weren't really considering the revenue stream specifically, this would be what we would expect to go to market to finance. Generally, this type of structure does come with the lowest interest cost. In this scenario, we would estimate about a 4.31%. But the final column is really the one that would be the point of emphasis, in that if we were to use this conservative structure, we're currently estimating there would still be about 1.6 million shortfall that would taper down through 2036, is it? That the city would have to come out of pocket to pay for. A lot of the reason for that delay is because of the inclusion of that multifamily tax exemption that really does impact the amount of revenue that the increment area is going to produce in the short to medium term. The second scenario that we put together tries to mitigate this to a certain extent by delaying the principal payments until 2040. This is what we consider an interest-only structure or a backloaded structure. And in this scenario, you'll see that it does lower the impact, although there still will be an impact. There would be an expectation that the general fund would have to cover about $1.1 million in the 2025, which is when the first payments would be made through the same this one shortens it to, I believe, 2035. There are trade-offs certainly by mitigating that impact. You will have a higher interest cost. There is a little bit, it is more sensitive to interest rate risk as well. Just to add, and just to reiterate again, we're using the revenue projections that were provided by Nick, but they are certainly that, and our debt service numbers are that as well. They're merely projections that are intended to help with planning purposes as you consider the project down the line. So the two scenarios that we did provide are more quote-unquote standard financing structuring. Just to kind of summarize for you, option one, generally you will have less excess revenue in aggregate, option one, you'll have greater excess revenue in aggregate, but with a lower interest cost, total debt service, but greater out-of-pocket expenses in those early years. The second scenario mitigates some of that, but at a cost of greater debt service, higher levels of debt service, and higher interest costs. We did include in this kind of some other structuring considerations. I don't want to spend too much time focusing on this because this part of the conversation will really happen when we're getting closer to the time of financing and we really are working with the city to develop a real financing plan. One of those is capitalized interest. This would allow the city to delay up to 3 years of payments, which offsets obviously those first 3 years of deficits from revenues to bond debt service. But it is fairly expensive to do so. What you're doing is effectively taking those early interest payments and amortizing them down the loan. So you're basically borrowing more to pay for that. So there is certainly a trade-off there, and it doesn't totally address that offset, as it only can be done for 3 years on a tax-exempt basis. There's also interim financing, and such as a line of credit or interfund loans, some sort of equivalent interim type of financing. And those would really help address kind of the delay in timing. It allow you to kind of borrow to the point that you would need to in order to offset until the picture becomes more clear about what that project will look like, what your ultimate borrowing amount will look like, and kind of smooth out some of those timing issues. So I think that covers everything that we intended to talk about. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Steve. Okay. Thank you again.
So the next portion, in your packet, in the project analysis that would potentially be going to the state treasurer next, there's an Exhibit 10, and I have it on your screen here. What it shows is the assessed value from new construction, and the first column is the known, what we think the assessed value, and this is in the 2023 dollars, so there's no inflation or CPI or anything involved here. This is all comparing apples to apples. The speculative development is just what we don't know. The other properties within the tax increment area that, I don't think actuarial is the right term, but the forecasting methodology projects that's what we would probably likely see, which means that from the development, just on coming out of the development agreement that we know about, we've got 472 million coming out of adding to the assessed value of the city with a total of 1.6 billion. That means if the city finances $30 million worth of parking garage and the infrastructure but we didn't do that, the private sector wouldn't do what they're going to do. This speaks to why we're doing it. This is why we would really want, as a city, on $30 million, we can induce a ratio, and I should have switched those words. That's private to public. 54 to 1 would be the ratio. 20 to 1 or 40 to 1 would be worth doing in the textbook stuff I read. I've created a graph that illustrates what Matt just showed us. If we were to do a fully amortized pay every single year, the principal and the interest with nothing deferred, the payments being $1.6 million a year, the amount that the tax increment revenues would not cover initially would be almost the full payment, but then as it works its way down to 2036, it would decrease. That means that the general fund or something else is going to have to cover the difference. Would we be able to recover it from the future TIF revenues? Speaking to our bond attorney, absolutely. We would just do a resolution at the beginning. That would be one of the purposes of the project, to make sure that we make the general fund whole. It becomes a matter of timing. So that means that the cash flow doesn't become positive. I think this is kind of worst case. I'm not sure if there's a better word. It's not, but this is the most dollars that we think the general fund could be exposed to. If we were to defer principal for the first several years, it becomes a much lighter situation. The payments would be $1.1 million, which we would, again, almost need the full amount to be brought from a different funding source. But it would be positive a year sooner, and the depth of the dip, if you will, and we keep using the word dip in different contexts, but the financial dip would be less. There would also be less revenue off in the future to use for other projects. So to summarize the risks, we know that we have a clock ticking. We have to extinguish the $4.8 million interfund loan that we still on the old target property. We would be looking at belt tightening in the first few years, And one of the big things is that the city has to take on risk of debt payments should the construction lapse. I would love to offer to share that with our other taxing entities, but, you know, the fact that we are pooling all of the overlapping tax districts, we are capturing future revenue that wouldn't have been ours, putting it together, but we end up taking the risk on the debt payments. One of the questions that I know somebody's going to ask is, what about our debt capacity? And this is in our annual comprehensive financial report every year. In 2021, we reported that the entire assessed value of the city was $14.2 billion. In 2022, it went up a whopping 19% to $17.1 billion. Our outstanding debt decreased from 21 to 22 just because we paid off debt and we didn't issue any new, and some of our existing debt did decrease, and the components of that are these: the SCORE jail, our community center, the Performing Arts Center, and then the Target loan, and then which means that our debt capacity went from 186 million to 229 million. My goodness, that is more debt capacity than we could afford the debt service on. But to answer the question, we do technically have the legal debt capacity. These are our outstanding debt issues on the Performing Arts Center, the Community Center, and the SCORE Jail. And you can, I've noted which years they drop off. And somebody's going to ask, well, how much is the annual debt service? And they vary somewhat, but roughly that's what the debt service is. Currently, we're using REIT to pay the debt service on all of this, except for the HUD loan. But still, you know, looking at the total debt of the city, I want to make sure that you are briefed on the whole picture. So that's that. This is an important slide. Moody's in 2019 gave us a AA2 rating. They had some very nice things to say about the city. They thought that as a city, our strengths are that we have diversified industry support, we have a healthy financial position, we have a small, in their opinion, debt burden. Our pension liability was well funded. The city has a considerable tax base, and we know that that's true. We look at our sales tax and all the other things every single month, and then they also thought that the median family income and unemployment rate was in the upper quartiles there. Their concerns were declining cash as a percent of revenue. I think we have been watching our cash. I report that to you every month. We've been seeing our cash climb, and we're a stronger city. But the available fund balance as a percent of operating revenue, this is where I want to bring it to you as a city council, because this is kind of a policy thing. Every biennium when we do our budget, we forecast all the revenue we can, and then we budget against that. We are not good at building our reserves or holding any back. If we get into a situation where we're issuing debt, where there's a possibility, where we want to have some reserves, I want to bring it to your attention now that we want to be thinking about this. Now, there's a reason that we don't build up our fund balance a lot. As you know, we have a waiting list of a lot of things. We have a lot of needs that we have to take care of, and so we bring you the things that aren't in the budget as well. So this just becomes another one of our considerations. Just want to make sure that we're keeping everything transparent and obvious. So what are our revenue options? The tax increment whole process speaks principally to future property tax. This is the entire menu of the city, and as you can see, sales tax and property tax are and utility taxes. Those are the biggies. We've already talked about property tax. Property tax is capped at 1% unless we create this new project, which actually creates a whole new revenue stream that we can use to do the development. Sales tax is the other one that we're watching, and we as a city need to really know our city. We need to know our local economy. We know that our property tax base has been growing very healthy, except for the fact that property tax is capped, it's not increasing as much, but it's very steady, it's predictable. I know that we have got high interest rates these days, and the real estate market has certainly cooled and slowed. But as a city, we're still a good investment. When we look at the overlapping tax entities, in the future, once we get to that terminal rate and the tax increment area closes up, all the new taxing entities are going to get their new property tax at their new rate. We are going to get 1/5 of the total. and that new projected run rate was about 7 million. That would mean that the city would get 1.4 million additional in property tax. That would be a bump in that year. But what about sales tax? Sales tax, we know, has been very strong, very steady. We watch it monthly. And when I'm presenting externally, I want to look at our principal employers. Here's the number of employees they each have. And this was my first attempt at trying to look at the diversification of our sales tax remitters. You see on the left, I've got Walmart listed twice, and on the Safeway, I've got it listed 3 times. Yep, because we got 2 and we got 3 of those. I took a drive around, and now this is a finance director's attempt at doing graphics. This is me trying to convey to the outside world the breadth and depth of the commerce in our city. And oh, by the way, up here in the upper left, you can see the Sound Transit Station in the background. But what I'm trying to convey is that we have a lot of commerce in our town, and we have a really good feel for how the sales tax has been performing in the past. This becomes one of our backstops in the future. We know that we're going to get sales tax from new things. There's the town center construction. There's all the other construction that we don't know is going to happen. We have our existing sales tax trajectory. And then we also have some sales tax that should be induced by adding some population. We're adding residential. So if we, as a city, as we go to budget in future years, we guard our new revenue and we use the waiting list. And this is something that I ask you and the mayor and all of our departments. If there are unmet budget needs, please communicate them to me. I promise I won't lose them. I hear you. I will value them. And then we can prioritize and reprioritize the list, and we do it actually pretty often when we do our quarterly budget amendments. We think we can greenlight some things, and we want to make sure we're doing them at the highest priority. Nick mentioned that he's trying to keep his forecasting conservative, and I think that's another thing we want to keep in mind. All of these projections, we're trying to be as conservative as we can, because that's how you want to budget. You want to budget something that we can achieve. We can actually come in if there's any surprises. We think that they should be good surprises. I think that's how he's treated the speculative development and also the assessed value assumptions. And then again, we as a city, when we monitor how we're managing each budget as it progresses through the year, and as we do next biennium's budget, we have an opportunity to guard our fund balance, capturing savings and new revenue, and using the waiting list to prioritize. So this is my last slide. The next financial steps are going to be take the presentation, send it to the state treasurer for their review. We will receive their project analysis report, and then we will continue to do debt planning. We'll update our debt assumptions for any changes in the development agreement, and we're also watching what develops with the maintenance facility, and we will be doing a credit rating. Oh, and what do I expect to hear back from the state treasurer? Based on the presentation we've put together, we expect to hear them say, yep, you have shown us that you have a strong economic tax base. We understand why developers see the opportunity. We see that you're trying to be cautious with your forecasting. We see that you've identified potential downside risks. You've got a plan to weather setbacks. You're looking very hard at sales tax principally, and we see why it's a priority for the future of the city. So my expectation is that the state treasurer would give us a green light to proceed, and we appreciate there being another pair of eyes. And with that, what's next with Shani?
That's right. I'm ready. Hi, good evening. I'm Shani Scatson, Senior Planner, and I'm just wrapping up the presentation with our Road to Tax Increment Area Ordinance Adoption. So you may have already noticed, if you spend some time on Engage Federal Way, engagefw.com, there is already a tax increment financing page up with chock full of frequently asked questions and resources and information, and a tool to answer or ask questions for staff to respond to. But so that public-facing website went live earlier this month, and that just is one piece not mandated by the RCW, but is just an approach that the city is taking to make this as transparent as a process with the community. There are some steps that are required from the RCW for for how we can adopt the tax increment area via ordinance, and we're already a couple of steps there. We sent a notice, a courtesy notice to the taxing agencies regarding tonight's meeting, which is just a briefing and just a discussion. We had our briefing meeting, and our next step will be to send the draft report to the treasurer, the state treasurer, for review and comments. And in the meantime, we'll be offering, or we will send official notice to the taxing agencies with that draft report, and we'll hold 2 public briefings for the community that are solely dedicated to this topic, the tax increment project. And those briefings are required to be noticed in the Federal Way Mirror, minimum 2 weeks in advance, on the city's website and via social media. So there is a very clear and open line of promotion to learning and inviting the community to engage with these conversations. Following our first public briefing that is scheduled for July 31st here in council chambers at 5:30, we'll start preparing for coming back with the ordinance to FEDRAC. And that same night, a couple hours before the FEDRAC meeting, we'll host the second public briefing. And then the community who attends the public briefing, if they wish to stay and leave public comment, they can attend the FEDRAC meeting where we'll discuss the ordinance. And we are on track to bring the ordinance for first reading to the full council at beginning of October, and wrap this up by the end of, or at least get the ordinance adopted by mid-October. But we're not done yet. Following that, we'll need to, assuming that we adopt the ordinance, we'll send a certified copy of the ordinance to the county treasurer, the county assessor, and those taxing agencies that will be affected. Are there any questions?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the bunch of information. Obviously, I do have questions, and the rest of the council, I believe, do have questions. So I just tried to figure out how are we going to do this. For the interest of time and the fact that we are missing 2 council members today, and this is very important discussion. My ask is there a way Steve or Nick and or Keith can share this presentation with Jack and Lydia, so that they have a way to, read information and perhaps provide some of their input. Is that doable?
Sure. As soon as this meeting is posted online, we can bookmark where the presentation begins and email it to them so they can see right where it starts and watch it that way.
Perfect.
That would be easy.
Thank you very much.
So, and we'll reach out to them, Councilmember Tran, and ask them if they want a briefing individually. So we can share the presentation. We can offer to sit down with both of them individually before this gets too far out the door.
Great. I know that you have to send this to Olympia by the 10th of July, so we'll try to give you back the feedback as soon as we can.
Perfect. That was just communicated to you. If you have any questions, that'd be great to be able to field those before the hearing
Yeah.
scheduled for September. So.
Great. So we'll open for questions right now. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. My other ask is that we have a lot of information on the agenda bill, but we didn't have these slides that were offered tonight. Could we get those too?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll send a copy of the presentation to you all
Okay.
tomorrow.
So my question is, it's probably for Steve. We are going to have to find funding for the maintenance yard for Public Works and Parks, which I've heard 40 million. I don't know if that's an accurate number or not.
For the,
maintenance yard.
O&M facility.
Yeah.
I think that's the last number that EJ mentioned, and he's out this week, but that's the number we're still thinking.
So how is that going to affect our debt and how this works?
That's exactly the question. And now, surface water, swim would bear the burden for part of that, and there's some fund balance built up. So which is exactly why we want to combine our long-term plan with both of those projects. We have to make sure it fits the general fund budget. And it would have to be, well, and the timing is also going to be ideal to put into the next biennium's budget, so that's what we're working on coming up with. We don't have the maintenance shop on agenda here, and I don't have updated information from that yet.
Okay, but that will be affecting our debt and our budget and what we can do in the future.
It will, and one important point is that even though we're going to have to find, during those negative years, we have to find alternate sources. The tax increment area, the TIF, can reimburse the general fund so that the general fund can be made whole. We're generating future revenue, and so it becomes a matter of timing, and it does become tricky.
So I think to the deputy mayor's point, I would just add that, the understanding that we have is that the O&M facility and the projects that are listed on the TIF project list, and other things that are kind of in the hopper as well, like there's been conversations about turfing Celebration Park. So everything that's in the city's kind of grab bag needs to get figured out. How do we pay for all of these? And as you saw from Steve's presentation, there's really going to be kind of a tight period where the tax increment that helps us pay for at least these projects starts to become revenue positive. But I think what PFM is here to help us with is to come up with that strategy for how we, I'm not a finance person, but what I said to Steve like a couple months ago is we got to figure out how to borrow $150 million, because that's really the big question. Because once you figure out that, all these other conversations we're having, I think just fits into it makes it easier. So I think what we're trying to figure out is, and it's not so much as you heard tonight, it's not how much we can borrow, it's how much we can afford to borrow. So where's the revenue? Where's it coming from? As Steve mentioned, there's swim revenue, there's potentially park impact fee revenue that's going to pay for, some stuff that's on our to-do list. And so I think it's now coming up with those revenue sources to provide the council with a holistic strategy for how we get all of this done.
Well, we're going to have to see the bigger picture eventually, because the maintenance yard is a priority. We promised that to staff, and we know that we need to be doing that really very soon. So, my next question was 5,292 housing units downtown over 25 years. I thought it was going to be a little bit more than that.
It's going to be hopefully quite a bit more than that.
Okay.
So as we mentioned in the presentation, Tiberius took a very conservative forecast about what actually redevelops, because part of it is if we get more than that, if more properties redevelop, that's actually a good thing for the tax forecasts and everything else. And so I think what you saw was a very conservative, all those projects that we think are coming are not, or only 17%, the number from the presentation was 17% of that tax district redevelops over the next 25 years. If we only get 17% of our downtown redeveloped in the next 25 years, I will be seriously disappointed. So I think that part of this was to dial back that forecast so that we're super conservative, so that there's only good surprises coming out of this exercise.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Jack
Yeah,
Walsh.
a few questions. So, first, a very basic one. Just that, there were multiple references to the multifamily tax exemption. Could you explain the mechanics a little bit of the multifamily tax exemption?
Sure. So right now, the city has a multifamily tax exemption for our city center core and our city center frame zones. One of the things that's coming before you in July is to expand that to the BC zone, and that was one of the recommendations that came from Heartland. There's two different versions in our code. One is a 8-year multifamily tax exemption, and the other is a 12-year multifamily tax exemption. And the difference between the two is the 8-year has no affordability component assigned to it, whereas the 12-year, to get that additional tax abatement, you have to have 20% of the units be affordable. So there's really no penalty to a developer to say, I want to use the 8-year multifamily tax exemption, because there's no obligation other than you fill out the paperwork and you basically get your taxes abated for 8 years. And so as we went back through and we looked at the forecast, we basically said to Tiberius, well, why not assume everybody's going to take advantage of that because there's no penalty to do so. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody will, but I think it's a pretty good assumption that developers will choose to do that because it's only in their benefit to do so. We did not necessarily include any proposals for the 12-year because it is likely, and Cheney and I were having this conversation earlier during this meeting, it is likely that Sound Transit will probably, their property might take advantage of that 12-year since there will likely be affordable units in their property redevelopment. But overall, from a district perspective, it's probably going to be fairly small.
Okay, all right, thank you. Next question, with the, right now, I mean, with the economy, there's such an uncertainty of interest rates. I mean, interest rates have changed dramatically the last 2 or 3 years. How does that uncertainty of interest rates impact this whole scenario?
You want me to take that one?
I'm going to either let Nick or Steve take that one.
I'll take a stab at it. In fact, in our monthly financial report coming up in a couple more agenda items, Chase is going to show you what the Federal Reserve is doing. We think that that rates have reached the top, and we don't know when, but we will expect them to come down. And that's just my bet. That's just we're looking at what the market thinks. Rates, were they to decrease, that would be a wonderful thing for our financing. We just are trying to use cautious numbers right now and based on what we think right now.
So you're taking a look at a pretty conservative, so that deficit the last few years, if rates did come down significantly, then that deficit could decrease
Yes,
quite a bit also.
that's correct.
Okay, and once again, kind of looking at the the worst case scenario also, a major recession hits, and all of a sudden sales tax revenue changes. I mean, what are the ramifications there? I mean, just obviously something like that wouldn't just be Federal Way; it would be the whole country. But worst case scenario, major recession hits. What's the impact, and how do we handle that?
We can model that, and in fact, that's exactly why we look at our sales tax every month. And because what does a recession mean? It means loss of jobs and loss of purchasing by the population, and our sales tax could decrease. That on one hand, we want to look at the macro level, at how we think the national economy is doing, and then we have to look at our own city. We have to know what we think that is going to happen in town center and all the different retail areas in our city. Some things are necessities, some things are luxuries. We have a lot of necessities, and I'm tap dancing because there's no crystal ball and I don't know, but we have to be very, one of the things when we're doing our risk analysis is we have to look at what could happen and what are we going to do to mitigate it. And one of the things has to come back to, we have to have some resiliency with our fund balance. We have to keep some of our reserves. I think we have a $3 million reserve, I forget what we call it.
Yeah, it's a strategic opportunities reserve.
Yeah. We've got a few pockets, and we always have the interfund loan opportunity where we can tap our capital or our fleet funds. Those are backup plans, but we can have a few of them.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for being tough on us.
All right, and great presentations. Thank you.
Council President?
So I'm lost. So it's how much we can afford to borrow, and we're borrowing $150 million.
No, we're looking at financing a parking garage at $30 million.
So where did that?
That was Keith. He said $150 million. It wasn't me.
Oh.
He has dreams.
The total project is 150.
I apologize.
I'm sorry, the total, what is the 150 referencing?
That's his future project list, should we ever have extra money.
So I think, so here's the thing is we have the O&M facility, which we heard is $40 million. The parking garage and the plaza is somewhere around $40 million, so up to 80. You know, there's other costs, capital costs that the city has its eye on in terms of things like turfing Celebration Park. We have a conversation going on about building a large community space and potentially moving City Hall. So all of that, at the end of the day, if you put all that money in one place, it's probably about $150 million, and that's my gross planning number.
Oh,
So,
We are looking at the construction of a parking garage that costs, we think, about $30 million, so that will induce the development we're looking at. The debt issuance that we're looking at is a little bit less, because even though we don't have a development agreement, we think that the developer is going to be offering us $10 million and will pay off the target loan. We will need to finance $24.8 million. That's what we're thinking currently.
well, just to throw a little I mean, I don't want to throw water on our plans, but Spokane, the city of Spokane, we were just there, built the parking garage for the downtown Nordstrom's development.
Yeah.
And the city was talking about bankruptcy over that. That was quite a few years ago, but, I mean, I don't want us heading into that kind of a discussion.
Sure. And we are in the habit of budgeting and putting the next 1 year or 2 years' worth of debt service in the debt fund, so that we've got it set aside, every budget year. Yeah, we don't want to be in that position. We'd like to learn from the mistakes of others.
Well, I can tell you that when I was in the legislature and we talked about that project, that they swore they would never rescue another city again out of that kind of a financial bind. I just want to
Sure.
warn ahead of time.
Sure, we want to be as self-sufficient as we can, worst case, and if other financing comes in, we hope all of our surprises are on the upside. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. First one is for Matt. When you present, when you share with us the option 1 and 2 and the interest on the bonds, are you using the current interest rate, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. We are using current market rates as of 2 weeks ago when we initially put this together for staff. Then we added a 0.25% cushion onto what current rates are. Certainly, as we know, the market can do what the market wants to do.
Sure.
So it should be taken with a pretty large grain of salt, considering the financing wouldn't take place, or at the earliest, another year and a half away.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. The follow-up on that question is, when I look at the option 2 and 1, option 2, even though it doesn't cost us a lot upfront, but the interest that we have to pay over time, we're looking at about $9 million extra. From your financial perspective, would it make sense for us to try to find the money up front and go with option 1 instead of option 2, where it costs us additional $9 million?
I'm going to mention that we haven't given him any information on the maintenance shop yet. He has not had a conversation with EJ and me yet, and that's going to color the answer. But you're looking at total interest expense, and do you look at total interest over time?
We will generally look, especially in a scenario like this where there's a revenue associated with it, one of the considerations is what is the appetite to service debt outside of that revenue? And I think the point that we were really trying to make in the presentation was that is going to be a primary decision point as we think about how we want to structure the bonds down the line. Our purpose for this was really just to give you an idea of what that could look like. But reality is we'll know so much more when this actually happens a year and a half from now. Those conversations would certainly progress with city staff and yourselves when you inevitably authorize the bonding.
And we will keep giving him our revenue updates and then our estimates on the maintenance shop, and we're looking to him for the options and the clever and creative ideas that we wouldn't think of, so a little bit of teamwork there.
Great. My last question is for staff. So when we build this parking garage, is it going to be paid parking or is it free parking?
That'll be a conversation for the city council to decide. So it'll be your asset, and whether you want it, so a portion of the parking will be for the PAC, and a portion will be just for the general public. And so it's likely going to be a public floor on a multi-floor garage. So we will have a condominiumized floor within that structure and separate access from the residential parking that'll either be above or below. If you guys want to make it free, that is your choice. If, there will be an operational cost associated with the garage. And the question, and part of this conversation we'll need to have somewhere down the road is, do you want any charges for paying to park there cover potentially the operational costs for the garage itself? Or does the city feel like that's just a public benefit and we want to leave that open and free for the public, and we'll figure out the operational costs in a different way? So that's definitely a conversation we need to have. I don't think it's either one or the other yet. I think you guys get to pick.
Okay, then I will ask our city attorney then, if we are going to use the public money to fund this project, can we charge the public to park there?
Absolutely, yes. So it would be yes, the short version is we can. Whether or not it's good policy is a different discussion.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Great. Does anybody have any other questions? Oh, Paul, I saw your light earlier.
Yeah, my question was to get a copy of the slide decks, but Susan took care of it. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
So,
Slide's the finance guy.
one last question. So, we're talking about a lot of projects altogether, but we can go at this slowly, taking one project at a time. Thank you.
Great. That was a great presentation. Thank you, everybody. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Oh, Dr. Pettigrew.
I would suggest if council members want more information and to understand this even better, to probably meet with Keith and Cheney one-on-one, and they'd be more than happy to go over it with you. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I would.
I love to volunteer.
I would suggest that Paul meet with him. I mean, with this, if I were in Paul's position right now, 90% of this would have gone like that. And he's a lot smarter than I am, so it's only 50% of it, not 90%. But I still bet that.
Numbers.
So.
Great, thank you. All right, we are moving on to item D, Federal Way Community Center locker room renovation. Jason, welcome.
Good evening, council members. Thank you for having me. The policy question before you is, should the city council authorize allocation of ARPA funds for the Federal Way Community Center locker room renovations? About a month ago, I brought to you as an informational item a assessment report conducted by Rock Project Management that showed the deterioration of the locker rooms at the Federal Way Community Center. It was also part of this packet for this evening. And so I've had to phone a friend, and we've had several departments involved in this discussion because the repairs are significant, and we feel they need to be done as soon as possible. And so previously, council has had some discussion about funding two artificial turf field, converting them from natural turf to artificial turf using ARPA dollars, but there's never been anything allocated for that. Additionally, this body has spoke about a $100,000 allocation for a study on a public market. So what I'm requesting is to take that money and allocate that to the Federal Way Community Center. The reason it would be allocated to the Federal Way Community Center is that operates as an enterprise fund and is not I feel like I lost my place there. Give me just a second. Oh, so the ARPA funds could be used for the artificial, why am I lost here? I'm sorry, give me just a moment here.
Sure, take your time.
Yeah, so we're looking to move that ARPA money over to the locker room project, which is about $1.74 million. Based on that, we also know that those are two big priorities for the city council. And so we tried to find funding that could match and equal and was appropriate to allocate over to that. And so based on some conversations with Finance Director Groom and City Administrator Brian Davis, we looked at some funding options, and you'll see on the page 2 of the memo where we're looking to fund the artificial turf upgrades from. And so that would be taking $1.4 million from the lodging tax. We have about $650,000 collected from mitigation or fee in lieu that we've received on development in the city. We would take $100,000 from the King County levy, and we have interest above revenue at $1 million, and then general fund expense savings at about $350,000. And that would fund the artificial turf fields. With that being said, the $100,000 for the public market study is not included in this, and that's a little bit of a disappointment, but it's still being contemplated. And as we kind of go through this, there's going to be ongoing community meetings about the downtown core and the redevelopment and the conversation you just had. And so there's still a commitment to that. It's just we don't have an identified funding source. But if you've seen those pictures in the Rock Reports, Rock Project Management Report, the locker rooms are in bad condition, and I have concerns of potential health department issues that we may run into in the future if we don't address them soon. And so the goal would be is to we would have to hire an architect with that funds, get the design work done, and then we would look to kind of piggyback, shut down the women's locker rooms, get those completed. The women would go through the cabanas at that point and then kind of leapfrog so that you had one continuous construction. But you would be looking to about 10 to 12 months to get through all of those phases, get all 3 locker rooms brought up to standard. And so with that being said, I would entertain any questions you may
Deputy
have.
Mayor?
Thank you.
As I mentioned, several departments working on this, so based on your question, I may need to phone a friend, but we'll get
All
through it.
right. So, thank you very much. For the community center locker rooms, when was damage first discovered? Because the pictures we've seen didn't happen overnight.
No, they didn't happen overnight, and I can't say I can tell you an exact date that they were noticed.
Just about, yeah.
It was a couple of years ago that we started seeing some real problems in the saunas is where it really started developing. We started to see this and feel this softness in there, and we were able to replace some boards in that. But then what it's come on relatively quickly because the damage was going on inside. It wasn't on the outside. And so where we really started seeing tiles falling off, and the tiles falling off were from that delamination occurring between the bonding of that and what should have been concrete board but was just gypsum sheetrock board, started to get soft and started to flake off and break. It was probably about 6 months ago we had some problems with the shower, and that's where it was really like we need to figure out a way to study this and figure out what's going on. Based on the damage in that shower, we took that out of service, and that's where we cut one of our major service, or kind of like a service panel in there so that we could see what was going on inside. But, it's really been going on the entire time the community center's been open, but really probably about 2 years ago is where the real evidence started to be seen in those saunas. And like I say, six to 10 months ago where the tile really started delaminating from the wall board.
How firm are their numbers to repair it? Because, oftentimes you start taking walls out, especially with plumbing and that kind of stuff, you find additional issues. So does this amount cover any potential surprises you might find?
The amount does have contingency in it. What I can say is we believe so, but also we don't know. There are going to be things that maybe are discovered that we weren't aware of, but they're not getting any better right now. And so we feel like now is the time
well, we've got this ARPA money available, and seems to make sense to move it forward.
Okay.
The other option would be to start taking locker room out of service, and that would be detrimental to our membership.
And on the artificial turf, I certainly see why we want to do that, but considering our other expenses that we have at this time, is that something we need to do now, or is the condition of the fields suitable to wait a while before we do that, say 5 years, 10 years, and plan for it? Or is that something that, because of the condition of the fields, we really need to get 2 of those fields transitioned to artificial turf?
Thanks for the question, Deputy Mayor Honda. And that's the very point why we're prioritizing the ARPA money for the locker rooms, because what we gathered from discussions from the council is that there was not consensus on what to do with the ball fields. There was sort of support by discussion to not spend the ARPA money and then talk about the ball fields later, but there was never any kind of formal consensus and vote to say, yes, we want to do this for the ball fields. So in answer to your question, they're natural fields, and so they go through the normal cycle of maintenance every year. As to 5 years, I assume they could be kept in the same condition that they are now with some minor upgrades. But again, I don't want to put words in your own mouth, but from what I took from the discussion, that putting artificial turf is to lengthen the season and to attract more usage out of the park than what we get now. And over the long run, it's generally more cost effective.
So it's something we should do sooner than later?
The timetable is, we'd love to get it sooner, but comparing it to what we need to do with the locker room, it's not really an either or. The funding package that the funding package for the ball fields is not what there's no action proposed for you tonight. That's the approach that we're taking. That's for the further budget discussion. What I would recommend is that when we have that discussion, it's for the council to determine how big of a priority the ball fields is. Because what we're proposing does take away from restricted funds that the ball fields are eligible for, but they are restricted funds that could go to other projects that we also need done.
Okay, thank you.
Jack?
Yeah, as I see it, the ball fields are a very high priority want. Very high priority want, but they're a want where the locker rooms is a need that needs to be addressed immediately. So.
I would also add on the ball fields that part of the ARPA money that you have set aside is for a grant writer. And just in talking with Tanya, when that grant writer is brought on board, that may enhance some of our funding options for the ball fields, having that person on board to broaden our funding options in the future.
Councilmember Walsh, just to add to what Brian said, that is something that we have discussed, is that the grant writer would be looking at other options in the future so that we aren't, we're hopefully trying to broaden our horizons for what kind of projects that, we need funding for, and what the alternative sources for funding could be that we maybe haven't tapped into, as of yet. So definitely that's on the table.
All right, excellent. Thank you.
Paul?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Maybe you can bring up to speed. Some of the other council members might already know. You have 1.7 million, and then you have lockers and a boiler project on there. Do you know what the breakout between the lockers and the boiler actually is?
Yes, and I'm sorry if that was not detailed in the memo. So it's 1.7 is for the locker rooms. The estimate for the boiler is 50,000. So the remaining ARPA funds of 41,000 and change, it may cover, but it may, based on the estimate, it probably won't. And so there may be a balance of $9,000 or so that we would need to make up the balance for. But that would cover all of the ARPA funds for if we use it for the boiler, which is also, again, as I mentioned in the memo, or as Jason mentioned in the memo, the
were
team
done
memo,
together,
as Jason so eloquently mentioned in his memo, that the boiler is, there's 2 out of 3 working, and so we're just going to shorten the lifespan if we just keep the third one offline.
Okay. And then second was, you said you knew about this, the problem started sending itself, was it a couple months or a year ago?
The locker rooms or the
yes.
boiler? Locker rooms, yeah, it's been a couple years now, and we've, as Jason mentioned, we've tried to do some patch jobs to prolong what we're discussing tonight.
Yeah.
But we could see that the problem was getting worse, and we have a reasonable amount of expertise in the matter, but we wanted to bring the council, you know, a professional evaluator of conditions, and they said, you need to do this sooner than later.
And this is the first time you brought it to council then? Is
Yes.
this- Okay. The second one was on the Celebration Park. The parks themselves, do they generate revenue? Do you know what that number would be on an annual basis?
I don't know the exact number that the entire department generates. We do generate revenue that does offset some expenses. Some goes back into the general fund, but the community good is part of that in there, and generally we will not collect revenues to absolutely cover our expenses. Now, in certain programs, we may, you know, make a profit on those, but then we use that profit to help some other programs where people who can't afford the programming or supporting that sort of thing.
Understood.
So,
And then, do you have a maintenance cost, like an annual maintenance cost that we currently have for keeping the natural grass itself taken care of?
just off the top of my head, and I'm going off of what I can picture looking at budget reports, but I want to say what is allocated to Celebration Park is in the neighborhood of about 350,000. But yeah, I can't really quote you, and if you want an exact number, I could email you in the morning.
I appreciate that. And then the last one on the public market, has there been any conversation, or has it even got to the point of what maybe a ballpark revenue generation on that, or what, a little bit more? I know it's been put to the side, but I'm just curious to know.
Yeah, and the reason for that is, and Keith's not here anymore, but community development is undergoing community meetings right now for the purpose of discussing what a town plaza and public market may potentially look like for the TC3 property. So we think it makes sense for those discussions to take place before we start talking about what a feasibility of a public market looks like, because that may certainly help with a lot of the feasibility questions of what exactly that looks like, because we'll have more community input of what they want. So we weren't really keen on spending the money now for something that may be totally different in September when the discussions are over. In answer to your question, though, revenue generating, that's part of the feasibility that we'll hopefully have once we either have the discussions, or if we need the feasibility study after the discussions, we'll answer that question.
Thank you.
Councilmember, I can also add a little bit of color to that. There are multiple groups that are interested in having community space. And so that for the next 4 months, there are once-a-month meetings that are being held with a committee that's been put together to discuss, what are the needs, what could be the space requirements, what could be the uses, how could everyone coexist together. So based on those discussions, that would formulate. There is a group that actually exists in the city that is advocating for the public market type of use. But there haven't been any kind of discussions on numbers and revenue and things like that that would be generated.
I'll stop there, I think.
Deputy Mayor.
The public market is not a city-run event. I mean, the city is not planning it.
That's an unknown answer at this point.
Okay. So, I mean, if we were to build a space and we were to put money into it, generally thinking then we would be running it, right?
Again, it could be,
Okay.
the feasibility aspect of it, and I think Deputy Mayor, you and I have talked about this a little bit, and that is that, is a great point that you made in our discussions, and that is that if this is not something that if there's a community effort to do a specific kind of market and we want to fund it, then that potentially is, walks like a duck, looks like a duck. It could be a grant. And so if we're giving a grant to a group for a project, then we've got 100 people in line wanting the same thing. So there's some questions of what that looks like, whether it's public or private. If it's private, then that grant dynamic comes into the picture. And we don't know the answer to that yet.
Okay, thank you.
Council President?
Sure. So perhaps, John, you could remind me, I think in answer to Councilmember McDaniel's question is that on the Celebration Park, the revenue generated used to be 50,000 generated revenue, 350,000 for operations and maintenance, correct? Or maintaining the
I don't
fields.
recall the exact dollar amount in revenue, but to answer your question, Councilmember, we do collect, as Jason mentioned,
Yeah.
we rent our fields. There's a tournament rate. On softball fields, we're talking specifically about 2 soccer fields in this particular case, 2 out of 4 soccer fields. So the revenue is not massive.
No, I know that. So I think what would be interesting is, do an RII, return on investment, with regard, when we do our review of the turf fields. And thank you for continuing to look at them. Of course, it's not, what we need to do right now is the locker rooms, absolutely, no question. But as you've already stated, as I'm sure there are federal, state, and other grants would be available for the soccer fields.
There are grant cycles with, through WRPA and RCO, so there are opportunities for
Yeah,
grants.
my only thinking with all of that is, when you save the money on the maintenance, you have other money in your operating fund to use for things that are necessary. And that's the only reason I had such an impetus on that was, and of course, when we go to July 4th, and we're all walking around that soccer field and trampling on the grass there, it would be really nice if it was turf field, but so that you wouldn't have such a long recovery time. But so thank you. And so, are we ready for a motion?
I'm ready.
Chair Tran, I just want to add one more thing. I think you all caught it in the memo, but to be clear, the 3.5 million estimate that we used to come up with this funding plan is only for 2 fields. So if we're talking about all of Celebration Park, it's that times
No, right, we're just
4.
talking
So yeah,
2
we're just
right
talking
now.
about 2. Okay, just want to be sure.
I mean, if we get 2.
That'd be a great deal if it was 3.5 for the whole park, but no, it's just for 2 fields.
I think we were talking about 5 and 6, fields 5 and 6.
Can I ask one more question about that? Didn't we receive some funding, potential funding from the state for the turf field? Or did I misread that?
We have not.
Yeah. No, we were hoping from the federal, but we didn't get it.
Okay, I thought we had, in the state budget, there was something, okay.
Yeah, so, thanks. All right, well,
I'll
if we're
take
ready.
a motion.
Yes, yes, sir. I move to forward the proposed authorization and allocation of ARPA funds as presented to the July 5th, 2023 consent agenda for approval.
I'll second that. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The matter passed 2-0.
Thank you.
And now we are moving to item E, Sahali SAT track replacement.
Since we're talking about fields, I hope to lobby a softball on this one. Policy question before you is, should the city council reallocate the ARPA funding originally slated to complete the Sahali track and reassign it to the pending Sacagawea track project? So last year we worked in conjunction. We have a partner in Federal Way Public Schools, joint management of both Sacagawea and Sahali. We were able to, being the city staff, secured a grant from King County Youth Athletics, and that funded our portion, or half of the replacement at Sahali, which had been previously allocated to be replaced with ARPA. Since that track is complete, that money is no longer needed there, which is why we are requesting to move it to a very like-in-kind track, which is the Sacagawea track, which is in failing condition. That would be our half, or our portion. We'll have to subsidize a little bit of that with major maintenance or park levy money. The last year, the track at Sahali was about $329,000 total. So, half is about $160,000, $165,000 a piece for us in Federal Way Public Schools. This is a $150,000 allocation. We're just asking to move that over. We will come back to you once we have projects bid and looking to award, that sort of thing. But this is just about reallocating it to a like-in-kind project. And with that being said, I would entertain any questions if there were any.
Seeing none, I move to forward the reassignment of the ARPA funds as proposed to the July 5th, 2023 consent agenda for approval.
I'll second the motion. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you for your continued support, Council.
Thank you, Jason. Now we are moving on to item F, AP voucher for from May 15, 2023 through June 15, 2023, and payroll voucher from May 1st, 23 to May 31st, 23. Chase, welcome.
Good evening, Council Chair, Council President, Deputy Mayor, Council Committee members. Before you are the AP vouchers in the amount of $4,567,146.78 and payroll vouchers in the amount of $4,092,662.28. We sent some responses to questions before this meeting to some of the council, and we'd be happy to answer any additional questions that you may
I
have.
do have a question on your response.
Yeah.
So I asked about a replacement check, and your response was that it was for a demolition project done in 2017. So my question is, it's 2023. Why are we replacing, or did we not pay for it in 2017?
We did pay for it, so it was a check that was not cashed by the vendor. And so we have to send the vendor an affidavit, and they did not fill it out for the replacement check until this year. And so we, once we receive that affidavit for them to replace the check with it notarized, we're able to replace that check. And so we were able to issue a new check. The affidavit basically says that they hadn't cashed the previous check. We verify that with our bank, and then we issue we void the old check and we issue a new check. And so that will show up on the voucher listing when we issue a new check, because it's a new check number.
Do we have a lot of those checks bouncing around?
Yeah, that happens. We do have a listing that we have to follow up on an annual basis, and we send letters to vendors to either cash their checks, or we'll fill out an affidavit for them to get filled out, and then we'll reissue the check to them. But there's times where it doesn't get to them in the mail, or different things occur. And so that it's a fairly common practice that we deal with accounts payable.
How long would we go before we just don't pay, if they're not interested in receiving a check?
A vendor always has the option to, if it's a service that was provided to the city, they always have the option to get a check reissued from the city.
All right, well, thank you.
Yeah.
So there's no time limit? I mean, if they don't cash it and they lost a check or whatever, I mean, can they wait 10 years and come back to us and say, no, pay us now?
On our bank reconciliations, we will keep things for a while. At some point, we have to write them off, but
It goes to unclaimed property with the state, so we have to report it to the state, and then they can still ask for a check to be reissued.
That's amazing.
Yeah, because that create a lot of work for your staff and try to go back and try to track that check for that many years, right?
as Chase mentioned, we do need to make a reasonable effort, and we do, but not an extreme effort, but we make a reasonable effort to try to get everybody paid.
Yeah, and we have really good accounting records, so we can.
Good deal.
Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, with that comment, do you know currently what's sitting in that amount then right now?
I don't have that specific amount, but we could follow up on that.
Okay, thank you.
We do reconcile our bank accounts every month. So reconciling items are going to be on every bank reconciliation.
Yeah, we have a listing of outstanding checks.
So it's an easy number to grab then?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Well, seeing no other questions, I move to forward the vouchers to the July 5th, 2023 consent agenda for approval.
I'll second that. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, the matter passed 2-0. We are moving to the last item of the night. Item G, monthly financial report for May 2023. Chase.
I was just going to comment, it says Steve on this, and I was going to say, hey, Steve, you certainly have rejuvenated a lot, you know, just,
I'm filling in for my director tonight, so happy to do so. So before you is the monthly financial report for the month of May. We come to you on a monthly basis to give you an update of how we're doing compared to budget on revenues and expenditures, and I will give the report today. We're at 5 months out of the year, 42% of the year, and we're doing well, as you'll see, with our revenues and our expenses. So with the 5 months throughout the year, our revenues are favorable in our general and street fund, which are our major funds within the city that cover most of our city departments. And revenues are favorable, the year-to-date budget of $18.9 million by $2 million or 10.8%. And expenditures are also favorable of a year-to-date budget of $24.9 million by $800,000 or 3.2%. And so we are trending favorably, and we're doing quite well within our major fund within the city. So I'll now cover some of our major revenue sources to identify how we're doing and how we're tracking along in the first 5 months and how we're doing compared to budget. These are our revenues compared to budget, some of our major revenue sources within the city. 5 of our major revenue sources within the general fund that impact the general fund. Sales tax, utility tax, permits, fees, business licenses, investment interests that we've been talking about are all trending favorable compared to the year-to-date budget. 3 are trending slightly below. But these are restricted funds, and so real estate excise tax that we've been bringing to you monthly is trending slightly below the year-to-date budget and prior year actual. We've been communicating that this is primarily due to rising interest rates and less properties being sold. Property tax is also slightly below the year-to-date budget, but this is cyclical. We receive these amounts in April and May and October and November each year. And so this should even out. It just has to do with projections. And so we're not worried about that balance. We will be doing quite fine. And then lodging tax is just trending slightly below. That's a smaller budget amount. That's $293,000. We throw it on here just to indicate how the economy's doing. And it's more of an economic factor than a large budgeted revenue source. And so I'll go through some specific revenue sources. Sales tax revenue is $462,000 or 7% over budget, year-to-date budget, and $823,000 over the prior year. As you can see in this graph, we're doing quite well. Retail, services, construction, sales tax is trending above prior year, as well as year-to-date budget. And so the sales tax continues to be a good indicator of our local economy, and we're seeing that in the various sectors. Utility tax revenue, which is a little more stable, it comes from our major utility providers, and it's doing quite well. We're $936,000 or 15% over year-to-date budget, and $556,000 or 9% over the prior year. Solid waste and recycling activities and electricity are trending upward. This does include all utility tax revenues, so this includes Proposition 1 utility tax, which is restricted to specific purposes, as well as our solid waste and recycling, which is restricted to residential street overlay. And so this isn't all unrestricted funding. This includes some restricted sources that have to be spent on specific purposes, but we are trending well, and the utility tax is coming in nicely. Property tax revenue, as I already indicated, is $82,000 or 1.4% under budget. We are on target with the prior year, but as you can see in the graph, there's 2 spikes during the year. That's in April, May, October, November. That has to do with the levy and when people pay property taxes. And so we expect to come on target with budget and above prior year with our 1% limit plus new construction. Real estate excise tax, we're still tracking on a monthly basis. We are 414,000 or 22% under budget, and 934,000 or 39% less than the prior year. We are tracking this closely. This is a restricted funding source that can only be used on capital projects and debt. And so we are tracking it and can always look at projects and make sure that we're funding these adequately. But we are tracking it. We are expecting, as was discussed earlier, that Council Member Walsh indicated that interest rates are changing. So we don't know exactly what will happen, but we are looking closely at it on a month-by-month basis, making sure that we continue to bring in enough revenue to cover all the projects and debt service that we have budgeted. Lodging tax revenue, as I indicated before, is 4,000 or 5% under budget. The budget is approximately 300,000 this year, so it is a smaller budget compared to some of the larger revenue sources such as sales tax, utility tax, property tax. But we like to show it. It's a good indicator of what's going on in our economy. We're seeing kind of a return of our hotel usage, and so that's a good indicator of, tourism starting to occur again within our city and other cities in our region. This is our investment interest, and we'll go into this a little more. This is showing quite favorably because of the interest rates being so high. It's 647,000 over budget and 1.2 million over the prior year. This has to do with us continually making investments, and we'll go right into that. So the total cash that we have on hand currently is 119 million with an investment portfolio of 55 million. In the yellow is our checking, which we keep on hand for payroll, accounts payable. LGIP is what we keep with the local government investment pool, and then the 55 million is in the blue of where we're making the 55 million investments. And that's why our investment revenue's doing quite well, is the high interest rates, as well as continuing to invest the money that we have to bring additional revenue in for the city. This graph just gives you a little more indication of how it's split. The 55 million as well as the LGIP in green, and then the different investments that the city's made of the 55 million. This graph is to just indicate that in June, as Steve indicated earlier, the feds did not do another rate hike. They have been doing, 50 basis points, 75 basis points, they were increasing it steadily for quite some time, and then they paused. And so we have some reason to believe that things might be slowing and things might start to go down with interest rates. We don't know that for sure, but that's something that we're going to be tracking and looking into with investments that we're making, as well as, I indicated earlier that we're watching REIT. If rates start to go down again, potentially some of the sales could increase again, and we could see the REIT kind of make a bounce back. This is a 2-year summary just to show that at the peak, with a 2-year average, it was at 4.53%, and then in May, it kind of dipped down to 4.13% on the 2-year average. And so it just shows that interest rates are slowing or cooling in the market, and we're also monitoring that. But we still expect our investment revenue to do quite well. We are making 4-year investments, and so we're locked in, and so we have some comfortability with our revenue projections and where we're headed. Like always, we give you an update on our investments. We had a May maturity. Every month there's a maturity, and then we make a new investment. So there was a May maturity of $1 million that was earning 1.7%, and then we made a May purchase with 3.7%. So that's another indicator of why our revenue is doing quite well with investment interest. So overall, we're managing to our budget with our revenues. Our expenses are on track with budget. Our cash balances continue to be strong, as I indicated. Investments are preparing for a rate drop, but we do have a number of investments locked in. So over the next biennium, we do believe that's going to do quite well. And I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jace. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. Utility tax rebate program, you knew I'd ask. So 16 people out of a city of over 100,000 is really sad. And Sherry did an amazing job of reaching out to those who have used the program in the past 5 years, and she came to the senior commission meeting, she went other places. We need to obviously do something different, and I'm wondering if we should switch it over to human services, because they might have more contacts with people who would be eligible and who might be needing to use this program or wanting to use this program.
Look for new avenues for outreach.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just an idea. It's going down, so, I mean, why are we even doing it at this point? We changed it to make it easier, and that's when and then COVID happened, and then it's just dropped so much. We're not reaching people like we should be, so.
Right, we include that in the monthly report, and and what we're reporting isn't good to read. We wish we were having more of an impact.
So maybe talking to human services or seeing if,
We'll do some brainstorming, yeah.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Jace? Seeing none?
Okay. I move to forward the May 2023 monthly financial report to the July 5th, 2023 consent agenda for approval.
I'll second that. All in favor, please?
Aye.
Aye. Matter passes 2-0. Thank you, Jace.
Thank you.
Our next meeting is going to be here in this room at 5 p.m. on July 25th. And that will conclude our meeting. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, staff, for your support. See you next month.
Thank you.